Doing? I'm Jamie from DoorBot, and I am from Santa Monica, California. I'm going to talk about DoorBot because the point of my talk is to sort of give you some non-obvious learnings we've had from being in the hardware business. So DoorBot is a doorbell for the smartphone. It allows you to speak and see who's at your front door from anywhere. It is a battery-powered Wi-Fi device, long-lasting. It lasts about a year on your front door before you charge it like a cell phone. In the last 18 months since we've announced it, we've shipped about 20,000 units. We're at about a $5 million revenue run rate, and we are VC-backed, first round capital, thanks to Chris for allowing us to fly from California here. And we also have had some fun things happen. We made Jay Leno's monologue, and we also were on Shark Tank. So.
Mainstream attention.
Hey, have you heard about the DoorBot? You know what this is? It's a doorbell with a camera in it that you can check on your iPhone. Oh, here's the ad.
Even when a pain in the ass pop idol visits you.
DoorBot was even featured on ABC Shark Tank.
All burglars ring the doorbell first.
You know what, though, Mark? That's actually true. Burglars are not usually violent criminals. They want to see if someone's home. They want the opportunity to go into a house that does not have people in it. So it's actually true. People do ring the door.
Yeah, so F you, Cuban. Thank you. And so this is about what we've learned so far. My 5-year-old actually came out here with me, and when I'm teaching him skiing, I always tell him every time he falls, which I don't know if it's true or not, but that you're always learning when you fall. So every day at DoorBot feels like this. So I think we're learning a lot. And I wanted to go over the non-obvious things. There's lots of obvious things like supply chain and how working in China is tough and all those things. But this is sort of the non-obvious stuff. And I think the most non-obvious thing, and it sounds obvious, is that hardware is a very mature industry. And mature, I'm talking about from the consumer side. So consumers have been consuming what they think are connected devices for a very long time. Whether they've been connected, whether they're as advanced as what we're doing, you know, as a consumer, they look at the electronics they had from the 80s as just a generation up to now. And that makes for a very interesting market for a startup because, you know, like when Twitter came out and they had the farewell, imagine if Twitter had to be on Amazon and have reviews. So they didn't. So their farewell kept coming out and we said, oh, it's a startup. It's so cute. Look at these guys out in Silicon Valley. It doesn't happen with hardware. With hardware, you get your ass kicked. And just to prove that, I mean, Apple themselves, who I would say in the consumer's mind is the gold standard of hardware from what they feel a connected device or a connected experience should be, and they're 3.5 stars on Amazon. And I just love this. I was looking for like a good sort of review, and this one was just amazing. I mean, here's Ethan, which we have to find this guy. It's a good phone, but it could be better. Yeah, the 5S. Yeah, good phone could be better. And he's probably right, but like that's how consumers think. And now think of how scary that is. Ethan thinks about DoorBot, which we launched with 6 people, exactly the same as the Apple iPhone. When we get customer complaints, they say, well, my iPhone or my Samsung TV, or are you fucking kidding me? Like those, they have like hundreds of thousands of people. Apple has $80 billion in the bank. We're 6 people, but they don't care. And so, but that's good. It really was a good learning. Like it was something that you have to take and say, if the consumer doesn't care and we want to be successful, well, then we have to figure out how do we survive in that. And so in January, we kind of regrouped. We sort of sat down and said, okay, how do we play in this business? How do we get a 5-star review? How do we get sort of at least a 3.5 stars, if you will? How do we get to that sort of Apple level? And what we sort of, and again, this is sort of obvious, I think, but it was non-obvious in some ways, is that we really are, we're a full-service company. We're not a hardware company. We're not a software company. We're a full-service, all-around company that's to deliver on multiple things perfectly in order to do this. And so we basically broke our company down from an operational side into 10 main areas. So these are 10 areas where we believe, and they're not all hardware, not all software, not all technology, where we believe that if we're not the best at these 10 areas, and there's a kind of sub-other ones, et cetera, but if we're not the best at these 10 areas, that we can't deliver on our promise to the consumer. And you can sort of read them over, and I put sort of percentages up, and we keep changing like what we think they actually are and what they're not. And even some of the non-obvious ones I think are like e-commerce. So how we actually do our e-commerce and how that plays into the product and how that allows you to, say, upsell recording is actually very critical to the consumer experience. And it's sort of, again, a non-obvious thing. I think when we started, we thought, use Shopify. Just plug in any checkout system. And then there's two sort of soft things. One is that we are a mission-driven company. We don't release our mission publicly, but we have sort of a much higher vision of what we're looking to do with our device. And that helps from an employee side and a team side. And the second one is brand, and the DoorBot brand. And again, these are things that as time goes on, you'll see how we do. But the DoorBot brand is not necessarily the best brand to go around for a long-term future into what we want to build. And so what I want to put up is these are things that we're doing. We might be totally wrong. We might be out of business by next year. But this is definitely what we're doing in order to sort of execute on what we think we need to do to have sort of this 5-star reviewed product and experience. And so one is, again, this is probably an obvious, but super hyper-focused. So we are hyper focused in the company around the things that we do and the things that we don't do. So it is probably more important about the things we say no to when we're doing either new product design, technology, et cetera, than the things that we actually do say yes to. Having 20,000 units in the field, as painful as it is when they break and have problems, is very beneficial to our fast iteration cycles and allowing us to sort of learn from what's out there. Taking a very long approach, and I think this also helps with the team and frustration. The cycles in hardware are just so much different, and I think everyone knows this. Again, this is kind of obvious, but when you're in it, it feels painful. To really have these cycles, when you decide in January that you have to do something different, no one sees that until October. So people still see what you have, the problems you have. You can't sort of just flush stuff out quickly. It takes a long time to do it. In terms of competition, everyone will keep calling us up. I saw this thing on Kickstarter. Is it like what you're doing? Who gives a shit? Apple and Samsung, those are our competitors. Until we hit 100 million in sales, 500 million in sales, then maybe a direct competitor could affect us. But until that happens, there's no such, we could have 100 direct competitors and still be fine until we hit those sales levels. Because the smaller volumes, the smaller levels in the multi-$100 billion business. Our contract manufacturer does $180 billion in sales, making only electronic devices. So when you're in an industry that's that big, and you're doing 5 million in sales, there's no competition. The competition's you, Apple, and Samsung in terms of how the customer perceives product. And also, what we realize is that there really are, in the connected device business, I was very frustrated with where we were at and what we were delivering and the problems we were having. So I started to go to other, what I thought were successful connected device companies out there that I thought were small, our size. And I kept realizing, I get there and say, you guys are doing such a good job. How are you doing it? How big's your team? And they say, oh yeah, we're pretty small, we're 50 engineers. I was like, oh, that's not so small. So we have grown. We've grown our team to over 40 people now, 28 engineers. And we believe at this size, we can now sort of start to deliver on the sort of that promise to the consumer and having that product. So these are some of the things that, again, from sort of those learnings of realizing that sort of Apple is your competitor and how we can have a hyper focus and then drive that team into a product and to a future where we believe we can try to build that next company, be sort of the next Nest, hopefully better and not recalled, but that's where we're looking at. And so here's my information. Happy to talk to anyone after, and thank you very much.
When you were with 6 people, I guess people took different roles. How do you find those people? I guess that must have been a big challenge.
So the question was, when we were 6 people, how did we sort of break up roles and how did we find the people? So I've been doing startups now for the last, I guess, 15 years since I graduated college. And so the people that were with me then were people that had been in previous startups. So I guess the question is, how did I find them then? And I think it's just been, it's a snowball, a very long sort of finding people. More recently, we've honestly been using a lot of recruiters. We found that that's really the best way, especially in Los Angeles, to pick people out of like sort of the older legacy companies. Sorry, I'll go. Or you.
Well, where do you see the mission of the company? Is this going to be doorbells? Is it going to be like all around in-street control? Like, there's a lot of ways it can go.
So there are a lot of ways it can go. So the mission is actually, like, our company mission is actually community security. So it has nothing to do with doorbells. It has nothing to do with technology. It really has to do with sort of a much higher sort of mission. Definitely the doorbell is our first product. We have to focus on the doorbell. We are building a long-lasting battery-operated Wi-Fi platform, so there's a lot we can do with that technology. But again, to this whole thing, we can't focus on multiple verticals at the same time. So sort of either sadly, or maybe it's a good thing, we're hyper-focused on the doorbell, and we do believe we can grow the doorbell business itself to a multi-$100-million business before, even if there is competition, before we get to the point where we need to really start to sort of spread out into other areas. I do. Sorry.
So can you guys start with your name and company when you ask the question?
My name's Jim. I work for Siminoff Healthcare. That's all the really positive side. What are some of your threats or concerns? What kind of keeps you up?
I thought that was pretty negative.
Even more negative.
I think, what keeps you up at night with hardware is one, is shipping. I mean, in order to be in this game, and I mean, Nest is a great example. I sort of poked fun at it, but, they just recalled, a couple 100,000 smoke alarms. Nest is a big company, a lot of engineers, a lot of background there. I mean, and they just recalled their whole product line. You're running fast in this business no matter how careful you're trying to be. And so I think one of the biggest concerns is waking up and being wiped out. I mean, waking up and realizing that something you did, that the software update, that there's something you did that you didn't think through properly, that you didn't test properly, because it does happen, and just being completely wiped out. I think that's probably the most negative.
Well, what was maybe, I'm sorry for two questions, but anecdotally, did you ever have a crazy one where like, hey, my house got robbed, my DoorBot didn't, which obviously there was something wrong, my house got egged, and DoorBot didn't see it.
So because I'd say just a doorbell, people don't correlate us to like home security. So luckily, in some ways, the first product failing doesn't, in the consumer's mind, like if your doorbell fails right now, you're not like, oh my God, my house burned down because my doorbell failed. So we're not correlated to that yet, but we will get more into that as we go and become much more of a security camera and device on the door. And then you're right, like if motion detection doesn't go off and the house was robbed, well, why didn't you record it? So we will put ourselves into that, and that's, it's good and bad. I mean, it's bad from a product side because we could fail, but it's also good because we become a much more important product.
Ron Rose, 3DP Create. How important was Shark Tank to your launch and your success?
So the question was, how important was Shark Tank to our launch and success? So if it wasn't for Shark Tank, we probably wouldn't still be in business, because the amount of non-equity diluting sales and profit that we got from that at a critical time, I don't know what we would have done if we didn't have it happen looking back. I mean, it literally gave us it was like steroid injection. I mean, it was like millions of dollars just being shot at you with sort of no cost. And it allowed us to go from 6 people to 40 with 28 engineers. We did raise some money, but having that sort of sales bump up everything, it gave us just a lot of momentum. I really don't think we'd be here without it.
I just want to follow up that question. I'm Andre, I'm with Shark and Delta Printer.
Great.
So Shark Tank, you said it helped you. Sorry, I forgot the question. I was thinking about Shark Tank.
We'll come back.
Question all the way in the back.
6 people.
Name and company.
How did you start?
Just name and company.
Sorry. Michael, IT consultant, Static Savant.
Thanks, Mark.
How did you start your environment with 6 people as far as the microelectronics
So the question is, we're like sort of with 6 people, like no kind of real funding. Like, what did we do? So we had a little bit of funding because I'd sold some companies, but that wasn't nothing big. I actually converted my garage. I mean, the idea came because I converted my garage into like a little lab, and we were all working there when it was like 4 of us or 3 of us, and we kept missing the doorbell. So everyone who would come to visit, we wouldn't see them. And I told one of my guys, I was like, find a doorbell that goes to the phone. This is ridiculous. And they came back and said, we can't find one. I'm like, you guys are idiots. Like, Google, like nothing. And so it actually came out of sort of being in the garage. And in order to then get the product design, we ended up outsourcing a lot of pieces, which is really terrible overall. The core things that you need to do, outsourcing them sometimes can work. I mean, there's definitely times when it works. But like our electrical engineer that we outsourced to misrouted certain things that you only find out later that you can't control, 3 months down the road. So there was, definitely some real issues that happened because of how small we were. Again, why we sort of regrouped. I mean, why we said sort of had this sort of a, what are we doing, where do we want to be, and how are we going to get there kind of moment.
So what we see on Shark Tank, is that like the Hollywood version of what actually happens in there? Because I feel like it's not the 5 minutes that we got to see and like what actually happens.
Sure. So it's a Shark Tank question of like what happened. So they actually film you for about an hour. It's probably the most exhausting thing you could ever do. It's probably actually the hardest thing you've ever done because you're not just answering questions to like a venture capitalist where you're sitting and actually trying to get the facts across. You're trying to do it in a way that's also entertaining because you're not guaranteed to air unless the episode is entertaining. So like snapping back at Mark when he said that, it was fun, it was funny, it was good TV, but it also probably got us aired. I mean, that was one of like the key moments where like, you school one of the guys. But it's very hard because there's 5 other people asking questions at the same time. So, but it's a very real show. It's not, like I thought they'd stop and be like, hey, Jamie, can you say that to Mark again? And look at him like this? It's like, sure, thank you guys, hold on 1 second. Like, but it's just, and when you're done, it's like, you're off. Like, that's it, like, bye. So it's a very weird experience. Very, very cool. If anyone has the opportunity to go on it, I think it's a great thing. And like I said, it probably saved our company. Not that we were in a bad spot, but it definitely it sort of allowed us to go to a complete another level without having to pay for it.
What's the hardware scene like in LA for connected devices?
So what's the hardware connected device scene like in LA? There's some stuff in Los Angeles. There's actually a lot of sort of like, I'd say like tech crunchy connected devices. So like the outside of the sort of the traditional startup, there's multiple, LA is a hub for Asia for product coming in, for product development. So there's at least 50 companies in LA that make sort of product in Asia, a lot of generic stuff, computer stuff. There's Belkin. So there's actually a lot of it there. The startup side of it is growing, but is definitely not like we're one of the fewer hardware startups there. More ad tech, arbitrage stuff. People in LA like to sort of they like to make deals. So they're sort of a little bit more like you see a lot more of those types of companies pop up. Cool.
I'm just curious. Yeah. So this works on Wi-Fi, right?
So this is it's a Wi-Fi device, and the real hard part of it is that it's battery operated. So if it was powered, that would have sort of, it has to go from being off, not even sleep mode, which is a different mode in a chip, but actually being off to on and on the Wi-Fi network in less than a second, or else it completely fails from the consumer experience. So that's the really, really hard part with what we're doing. And we believe that sort of pushing ourselves to the hard part is actually getting us to a place with technology that will create a return. So when we launched, so do people worry about the DoorBot being stolen? And so when we launched, we had sort of these questions coming in, and my team were looking at them, and I'm like, why are people saying this? Like, what are they talking about? Like, why would someone come to your door and like rip a door? Like people aren't like taking like, there's intercoms on front doors. I don't see like people with crowbars like ripping them off, but because it's a device that's standalone, like you're thinking in your head like someone's gonna steal it. So for like the first week that we were sort of pre-selling, I just was like ignoring. I'm like, these are all idiots. Like, I'm not even gonna look at this, because in my mind it was like seemed like a terrible question. And then it kept getting more and more. And then so finally we just said, so we just came out with a guarantee that if it's stolen, we'll replace it free of charge. And our sales doubled because of that. So it wasn't a stupid question at all. It was something that people really thought about. And again, it was a learning that like if that's what the consumer thinks, then like you have to react to it. So far in 20,000 units, 2 have been reported stolen. 1 we're pretty sure was not stolen. 1 we think might have been stolen and we replaced it. So.
Time for one last one. You had one?
I had the literally same question.
Okay, and there's one all the way in the back.
All the way in the back, name and company.
So the question is, what parts did we outsource? That we were glad that we outsourced? So what parts were we glad that we outsourced? I think it's, I guess, which would go to what parts are we still outsourcing. So I think what we outsource today is manufacturing. And we do it in a way where we could technically manufacture it in our warehouse in Santa Monica if we wanted to. All of that knowledge is with us, including writing the test plan software for the factory that the DoorBots go through before they ship out of the factory. So we actually even write that software. So at this point, we've really taken everything but the actual like contract manufacturing. And obviously there's some pieces with that, but electrical, industrial design, mechanical, all this stuff is in-house now. And I'm just not a big fan of having to outsource any piece of it. I mean, these are just very complex systems to put together, and every piece that we seem to outsource, other than stuff that's like, like we're not going to open a factory. So any piece like that, besides that, seems to be something that is critical to have. And so far, the results of that, well, can't be seen from the outside because it takes a long time to cycle through. From the inside, has seemed to deliver a much better experience so far.
Unfortunately, all the time we have, but you're going to be around?
Yeah, and I'll be around after this. So.